Good morning, students. It's Friday, March 20th. Glad to be with you. I wish I were with you in person. We're waiting from the College Board to find out what's happening with the test. We're hopefully have some information today. As soon as I get anything, I will pass it along to you. But either way, we're moving forward and doing what we can until we see each other again. So I think this is probably where we left off the last time with labeling disorders. We talked about Rosenhan's study. I remember when he got himself committed to a mental institution and the stigma of being institutionalized was almost as hard as being labeled with a mental disorder itself. So one thing that I actually should probably point out is that what behaviors would be considered abnormal if they're taken out of context. If you're in a heated argument and somebody watches two people, let's say, in a heated argument, that's understandable. What if they're two people just kind of joking around and they're acting like they're in a heated argument? I see this kind of thing in the hallway a lot of times, and people are like, "Oh no, we're just joking around." Well, to some it doesn't look like a joke. What if you pray outside of church? I know that my family gets some weird looks. We pray before we eat at restaurants. And I'm not ashamed to do it, but I definitely know there are people who are thinking, well, that's kind of weird. You're dancing with excitement over some good news. Would that be looked at as odd if people don't know what your good news is and they just see you dancing around kind of inappropriately at an odd time or an odd place? So keep this in mind, that when we label things, labels are difficult. So some rates of psychological disorders, as you look at those charts, first of all, kind of look at the picture in the middle. This is what when I talk about taking behaviors out of context. Take a look at this first picture on top. It's got, well, so first of all, these are men, and so they have longer hair that looks more maybe feminine, but these are men from a West African Watabi tribe. And basically the idea is that's how you attract young women. You dress up like that, you twirl a colorful umbrella to get their attention. They wear costumes and makeup, and this is three guys trying to pick up the ladies. Now, for many of us in, say, American society, we would look at that as like, you've got some crazy eyes, and that is not appealing to a lot of people in America. However, if you look at the picture on the bottom, you could almost imagine that guy pulling up next to you in at the stoplight and him looking over. Of course, he's got, the bass just pumping from that car. I think people in West Africa would look at that guy like, what are you doing? He's probably doing the same thing, trying to attract young women of the opposite sex, and that might be viewed as abnormal as well by some. So keep in mind what behaviors might be considered abnormal is very cultural, and that's obviously one of the perspectives, is a sociocultural perspective. The rates of psychological disorders, though, you can see the United States is very high. We can make lots of connections to that. Maybe we have better policies for defining mental disorders. Maybe we are more open to seeking treatment. One of the ones that actually kind of surprised me was how high Colombia was. Places like Japan or Nigeria, maybe it's perhaps because they don't have access or things like that to mental health care. So just keep some of those things in mind. As if you look at that table over on the right, the percentages of America reporting to disorders in the past year, about a quarter of the United States population, 26.2%, has experienced a psychological disorder. That's a lot. That's 1 out of 4. So if you or people you know experience these disorders, it's not odd, it's not weird, it's actually quite common. If you notice, the most common of all are mood disorders, followed quickly by phobias. So that's actually where we're going to start today. Real quick, we'll go through the perspectives of the biological, psychodynamic, behavioral, and cognitive and sociocultural approaches. Just remember the biological approach uses the medical model, and that's usually using medication. The psychodynamic is based on Freudian theory that's using the unconscious to motivate behavior that you're looking at the past, you're looking at what's underneath, what's not being said. Behavioral is obviously the observable current behavior. It doesn't matter what happened in the past, the current behavior. Cognition, the perception and how people think about themselves and their environment, and the sociocultural, the cultural circumstances that can cause abnormal behavior. So there's some risk factors for mental disorders, lots of risk factors. I mean, just again, is it nature, is it nurture, or is it a combination of both? And it is definitely a combination of both. However, look at those protective factors. The very first one, aerobic exercise. I don't know if you've ever seen a movie called Legally Blonde, but in it she talks about how a woman was arrested for killing, an aerobics instructor is arrested for killing her husband, and she said, endorphins, exercise releases endorphins. Endorphins make you happy. Happy people just don't shoot their husbands. And the idea is that, yeah, you can release a lot of pent-up anger and anxiety and thoughts and feelings through exercise. So I'd say go get some sleep, get some exercise, eat well. And then there's lots of things that, once again, probably more on the nurture side, perhaps on the nature side as well. So the real only section that I want to get through notes today is on anxiety disorders. We're going to kind of characterize the major psychological disorders, and the first one is going to be anxiety disorders. Obviously, if I'm going too fast through this, you need to stop, back up, whatever, do whatever you need to do. But anxiety disorders are probably some of the most common disorders. It's got an intense apprehension. There's really no physical problems, although sometimes it can manifest itself as like feelings of nauseousness, tightness in your stomach, tightness in your chest, like hard to breathe. But there's no physical problems. And it has a very broad classification, which once again is what is the DSM is criticized for, because boy, lots of people could fall into this category of having an anxiety disorder. So GAD, general anxiety disorder, is one of the most common. It's characterized by being jittery, just like always, tapping your foot, being anxious, really nervous, looking around, being agitated, sleep deprived. Oftentimes you have high blood pressure. The thing about this is it's kind of hard to characterize because you don't really know how to avoid the causes. Sometimes you can figure out what triggers GAD, and sometimes you can't, and so it's very hard to characterize. It's more prevalent in women. In fact, 2/3 of people who have anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, are women, as compared to other disorders. So this is very much in women, which again, then you stop to thinking like, well, do women face stress in a different way? Do they internalize stress differently than men? Men might do this, women might do that. So it's easy to understand why general anxiety disorder would be more female characterized. And age. Age also, we notice that it's less common for people over 50 to be diagnosed with GAD because people tend to mellow out as they get older. Emotions do not become as intense. Perhaps it's because of crystallized intelligence. Perhaps it's because of life experiences. Maybe it's because of something happening in the amygdala. But either way, we know that age is definitely a factor, and it's characterized by people usually under 50, oftentimes women who are who just have these feelings that they're hard to kind of pinpoint why they feel that way. Panic disorder is something a little bit different. Sometimes it's referred to as an anxiety tornado. It's very unpredictable. Panic attacks can happen for usually minute-long episodes. It's when your heart is racing, you have this choking sensation, you have dizziness and short of breath. If you've ever seen somebody, or you know if yourself goes through panic attacks, they would not be a pleasant experience. Demi Lovato has been very open about her panic disorder. She has panic attacks. Oprah Winfrey has been very open. The lead singer for Green Day has had to cancel numerous concerts because his panic disorder and panic attacks are so bad. So it's very common. And there, again, these attacks that just come on and you don't really know why. Partly because, as we said, when this anxiety happens, it's hard to characterize, it's hard to pinpoint, and then you get it kind of all rushing at you at once like a tornado. It kind of descends down on you. Phobias. A phobia is considered an irrational fear. It causes a person to avoid an animal, an activity, a situation. We all know about my specific phobia, myrophobia. But it can also be things like heights or enclosed spaces. The fear, there's a difference between a fear and a phobia. I like to say I have a fear of those little kind of rodents, but maybe I don't have a phobia. Well, no, I do. I have an irrational fear. It makes no sense because I know that doesn't hurt me, but it scares the heck out of me. So people can be afraid of water. I'd love to kind of look out at you right now and be like, oh yeah, who's afraid of blood? Like, who would pass out at the sight of blood? And if those are some of those things that you deal with, think about the job and the career and the vocation you might have at one point in your life. If you have a fear of heights, do not go into like don't be a lineman where you're going to have to climb up poles to fix and do repairs on like cable and electrical lines, because that would not be what's for you. So obviously just being aware of your phobias. Social anxiety disorder. Now, social anxiety disorder is kind of it's a social phobia. But it's taking shyness to the extreme. This is when you're not just shy around people, you actually have kind of a fear of being humiliated in society. You have a fear of being scrutinized or ridiculed in society. So because of that, you just completely avoid social situations. Or sometimes you just kind of sweat it out, if you will. This is the people who they would hate to talk in front of a group of people, but maybe they can do it. No, social anxiety disorder is you will find a way to get out of the situation before you would ever even put yourself into that situation. So one of the most common social anxiety disorders is agoraphobia. It's a fear of crowds or public open spaces. And agora is an old Greek word for an open market. If you look at that picture right there, first of all, I look at that picture right now and I think social distancing people, you're too close together. But that could make a lot of people very uncomfortable. This is more of a common disorder. And if you don't know how to exit, if you don't know how to get out of the situation, if you are in a crowded subway station or an elevator, agoraphobia is definitely in things like that. So this is having a real fear of being in crowds or large groups, especially in open spaces where you feel like you can only go in mass. People would avoid that. Obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. Two things that I want you to know about this. A, whoever did their project on OCD, and I don't have it in front of me, they would tell you that this is characterized by unwanted and repetitive thoughts and actions. Now, the thoughts are what we call the obsessions, where you just can't stop thinking about it. Like your mind is racing, and that's the only thing that you can focus on. And the actions are the compulsions. So the thoughts and the actions. So obsessive compulsive disorder. This is where it really bothers me. People who suffer with obsessive compulsive disorder suffer with it. These are counters, they're checkers, they're cleaners, they're hoarders. People who, again, remember what the word was? We'll go back. Do you remember what the word was? And it interferes with your day-to-day life? Maladaptive. If you are a checker, for instance, you know you locked the door, but you cannot stop thinking, did I lock the door? And you lock it, and you lock it, and you lock it, and you know you've locked it, but you can't let yourself walk away. You can't let yourself not keep locking the door. Like you'll unlock and lock it, unlock and lock it, and you'll do this hundreds of times over. In fact, so much that, now you're late to get to school. Now you have not taken, the food off the stove and it's burned. Like it's interfering with your day-to-day life. That is obsessive compulsive disorder. Believe me, people wanting things just so, maybe in straight lines, maybe color coordinated, that's not obsessive compulsive disorder. It's your thoughts and your actions that interfere with your day-to-day life. When it causes distress and interferes with your day-to-day life and becomes time-consuming and debilitating, that's when it becomes an obsessive compulsive disorder. It's characterized by obsessive needs for neatness, order, and symmetry, but it's taken to the extreme. I put that picture, his name is Mark Summers. Mark Summers used to be on a show when I was a kid called, I can't even think of it now. But he suffered with obsessive compulsive disorder, and it was basically a game show for kids. Think of essentially like The Price is Right for kids, but they had like obstacle courses. Well, sometimes he had to get involved, and like if the kids won a certain event or whatever, he would get slimed or whatever you see right there. This was really hard. This was his job, yet he had to endure and put up with things like this. It wasn't until after the show ended that he came out and basically said, this was the worst job I've ever had in my life. It made him famous. It made him millions of dollars, I'm sure. And he said it was the worst thing he ever had to do because he had obsessive compulsive disorder. So when some of these things were out of his control and he couldn't handle being slimed, if you will, or whatever that was dropped on his head, it was very difficult for him to handle. And the last of the anxiety disorders is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This used to be called shell shock or battle fatigue back when it was kind of first. This is when they started noticing it after After wars, especially World War II, World War One even to an extent, and they would see soldiers kind of walking around in a daze, in a trance almost, that they couldn't believe the things they saw, the things that they were required to do. But now we know that is really not only due to wartime situations. Now we definitely know that PTSD can happen to really anybody who has experienced trauma. 9/11 survivors, especially those in the World Trade Center, show very high rates of PTSD. In fact, even in New York City, they have higher rates of PTSD than in other areas because of what happened in 9/11. You know, don't underestimate that this is only because of war. PTSD is from a trauma, some sort of trauma situation. However, one thing that is really hopeful, and one thing that's really something to remember and grab onto, that survivor resiliency is extremely impressive. People who experience trauma don't necessarily respond pathologically. And we know this from Holocaust survivor studies. People who, for instance, survived the Holocaust, and I've talked about Viktor Frankl before, Man's Search for Meaning. I very much, you've got time now. Read this book. It's an easy read, it's a short read. It probably will change your life. How do people who endure the most horrific, terrible things survive? And not only survive, but go on to flourish and live and find true meaning in their life. And what we realize is that suffering actually has a transformative power. It's called post-traumatic growth. Basically, and it's very much kind of the Christian ideal. Life is hard. We're going to suffer. In fact, we should suffer, because if life is too easy, then we're probably not following God's will. We're following our own. We have original sin. We are born with original sin, and therefore we're always going to be inclined to sin, and that is tearing us away from God. When we suffer in life, which we will, and some people unfortunately will suffer more than others, you can grow from that. You can learn from that. You can have a positive change as a result of a life crisis. So I recommend that you watch that short YouTube clip that I've embedded. It's from a movie that a man has come back. He's a sniper. It's called American Sniper in the Iraq War. He comes back home, and life is almost too surreal for him. And he's definitely suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder. But he's the number one sniper in the world. He is the American Sniper. He shouldn't be suffering. He's a hero. He's a national gift. Yet he can't kind of get away from the trauma he has seen and probably inflicted himself. So watch that video. We'll pick up with this on Monday. I'm hoping that things work out for this Padlet. I will let you know basically today. I know people are having trouble uploading their videos because it's saying the file is too large. I'm working on it. I'm seeing what I can do. Hang tight. If I need to stretch the posting to another day, I'm not concerned about it. I would like to see your video. I'd like your classmates too, but at the very least, I'd like to see your video of your infographic, because I think you can probably impart a lot of information to others and me as well. So talk to you later. Bye.